Hi, everybody. Welcome to a delayed episode 98 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. I needed multiple watches for this season finale of season 2 of Rings of Power. And then we had travel stuff going on, so we were unable to record. But here we are, the season finale, Sam. Why don't you read us our
It's upon us.
recap?
All right, this is Rings of Power, Season 2, Episode 8, the finale. Durin the Third is attacked by the Balrog that lives below the Mithril Mine. He names Durin the Fourth king before fighting back as the cavern collapses. The stranger confronts the Dark Wizard and rejects his offer to supplant Sauron. The Dark Wizard destroys the canyon, forcing the Stoors to migrate. Nuri and Poppy join them. The stranger finds a staff in the canyon and believes he will come to be known as Gandalf. Ar-Pharazôn learns from the Palantir that Halbrand is Sauron and accuses Miriel of aligning herself with him, discrediting the results of her trial. All of the faithful are arrested except Elendil, who escapes to the island's west with the sword Narsil. Kemen claims Pelargir as a military outpost. Isildur asks Estrid to return to Numenor with him, but Kemen does not allow this, and Isildur leaves Estrid with Hagen. In Eregion, Sauron kills Celebrimbor and takes the 9 rings from Galadriel, while Adar is killed by disillusioned orcs. Durin the Fourth sends his army to aid the elves, allowing Gil-galad, Elrond, Arondir, Galadriel, and other survivors to escape to a valley north of the city, where they resolve to stand against Sauron. All right, Sean, this was it. That was episode 8. Relatively accurate summary. In reading that, I realized that, man, it felt like we spent a lot of time in Eregion, and that's where a lot of the action focused this season. So we're going to end with Eregion, because that's probably the meatiest part of our discussion. But we're going to begin with Rune and the Dark Wizard and the Stoors and Gandalf and Tom Bombadil and all that. And this is not a season recap. This is just our episode recap and reaction. So there might be some deeper themes that we're going to expand on. But let's start with this. So, Sean, what did you think of what happened in Rune?
I couldn't stand how the stranger just appears in the Stoor Hobbit village for a couple of reasons. We are left, the last time we see the stranger, he's with Bombadil in a forest full of trees, and he's told to go look for his staff. And he begins walking down into that valley of trees. That's the last time we see him. Then this next time, he just suddenly appears in this hobbit village. He has no idea where this village is. He's never been there before. Bombadil didn't direct him towards it. He just appears. And that encapsulates so many of the problems I have with the show. There's just no thought that goes into it. It doesn't feel like there's no buildup. And this is a very, very clear example of that.
Yeah, no, I had a similar negative reaction. We should say we watched this for I've only watched this episode once. You've watched twice, so you have a little bit more of a photographic memory, more of a more accurate recall, I would say. But I watched this and I just thought now they could have easily set it up so that there was a path and it diverged. And one direction it goes to the Hobbit village, and the other direction it goes to this forest of trees. And Tom Bombadil could, because this has been the whole thing that Bombadil was setting up for the stranger, who turns out to be Gandalf. We'll get to that. You can either choose your friends or you can choose power. And they could literally have a fork in the road. Go one direction to the village and save your friends. Go the other direction, get the power, get your staff, and go and do whatever. And then they could leave that as a cliffhanger at the end of the previous episode. And then at this episode, it begins with him in the Stoor camp. And so we realize that, no, he picked his friends. He's going to, roll the dice and go with what matters to his heart. But they didn't do that. Instead, yeah, they set it up as if he's going to spend the next episode finding his staff and then whatever happens. But they just skip ahead to this confrontation. So there was that. And that was just one of several kind of inconsistencies. There are some other ones here that you pointed out as well, and that, frankly, if you didn't point them out, I would have pointed them out as also. So the next thing that we brought up is that previously the Dark Wizard established that he would handle the stranger while his Godrim nomads or whatever would handle the Stoors, and that's thrown out the window.
Well, we get a little bit of the Godrim threatening the Stoors, but then we never get any follow-up of the Dark Wizard interacting with the stranger at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that writing where I'm just like, this isn't the final seasons of Game of Thrones. You're not trying to wrap up all of these plot lines in a succinct manner. This is season 2 of this show, and you set something up, give it time to pay off. Like, there's no time awarded to the events in Rune in particular. And we can talk more about Numenor as well. But with Rune in particular, like, there are plot lines. Like, I'm interested in the Dark Wizard. I was interested in these Gaudrim nomads, but we see the Dark Wizard kill one of them, like the leader, apparently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't care at all. Like, with the Stewards, I don't care about the Stewards. The only reason I care about characters like Tom Bombadil is because I know the backstory of the books, but all of these other characters, we don't know anything about them. And I'm getting really tired of that. This is like Mystery Box Light.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we know the stranger isn't Sauron, but who is he? Oh, we'll find
Mm-hmm.
out at the end of the season. We don't know who the Dark Wizard is, but maybe we'll find out. And I'm like, I'm just cut the shit off. Like, I'm so tired of that.
Mm-hmm.
And like with this, you said it would have made way more sense for the conversation between Bombadil and the stranger to just be in a location and then have Bombadil say, you have to pick between power and friendship. But instead, we just get all of like this just shit that.
Yeah.
And the
I
problem
mean,
with this episode in particular is that you and I think, both agreed that the middle of the season was really working its way up towards something much better.
mm-hmm.
I was so disappointed with most of this episode.
Yeah. And it's not to say, and you say most, and one of the things that continues to stand out for me are the visuals. And I think that's really one of the only things that this Rune stuff had going for it was outside of the performance, the portrayal of Bombadil. I think we had issues with his character being there at all. Like the Dark Wizard was cool. The Gaudrim could have been cool. That little like pyramid fortress thing that they had was interesting. And I was just, again,
Those witches that he summoned by cutting his
yes,
hand that
all
we
of that.
never saw again.
They basically zero purpose. And it just, and maybe I'll go into more detail, but there would have been a really cool way of having, well, the thing that sucked about this scene in this episode is that you have this confrontation between the Dark Wizard and the stranger, but they've never met before. Like they have very little context for each other. So there's no depth to their relationship, and so it doesn't fucking matter when the stranger says no. And then I also didn't care when the Dark Wizard destroyed the canyon because I don't like these hobbits. I don't like these Stoors. And that's like mission not accomplished, writers and showrunners. Your big epic confrontation fell completely flat because I don't care about these characters. There's no relationship here. And yes, you got the staff. The only reason that people care about that staff is because they've seen The Lord of the Rings. And so it's just one of the, like you mentioned, Mystery Box Light. It's like they're doing it. It's like they're kind of like flicking our ear with it. It was like, hey, look, Gandalf's staff. And then they have the Gandalf, his name is finally established in this episode. And you said how this is actually accurate to Tolkien's explanation of his name. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I don't remember which book it's in. It could be the Histories of Middle Earth. It could be the Nature of Middle Earth. I can't remember which one in particular, but the similarities between the establishment of the name Gandalf as like a derivative of Grand Elf are very, very similar to what Tolkien wrote for Gandalf. So, I mean, that's the name given to him by hobbits, right? Hobbits call him Gandalf. And then
Yeah, I think so.
elves call him Mithrandir. So, like, there's all of these other different names, but at least the establishment of the hobbit named Gandalf is pretty true to what Tolkien himself had written. So, if people have issues with that, then you've got your anger placed in the wrong spot. But
Yeah, I mean, I it's the most respectful thing. It's one of the more respectful things that they've done as far as giving the origin of his name to Hobbit-like creatures. The thing that I didn't like about it is it just came out of nowhere. They just, as they're leaving their completely busted canyon home, a couple of them call him Grand Elf. And it, again, he's never met any of these stewards before. Never, I think they at least did say in season 1 when they were discussing him among the Harfoots, they said, well, he's not an elf. So the potential of him being an elf has been brought up and dismissed once last season. And then we never got it here again, this is what happens when you rush and put all these things together. So he, in this episode, meets both the Dark Wizard for the first time and meets the Stewards for the first time and is called Grand Elf for the first time. And it's one of those things it just fell flat. It's not established that these stewards even know what elves are or who they are. And it would have been really easy to do that as a way of establishing the climactic changes that have happened in Rune. Like, oh, the elves used to be here, but they left when the trees died or something like that. Right. And then you can at least establish the fact that these stewards know of and have a respect for or a longing for elves. And so then it matters when they call him Grand Elf. And it also would have made sense if that's the type of thing you call somebody when you respect them and you appreciate them. What has the stranger done except for get their canyon destroyed? Right? I don't recall. Why did the Dark Wizard leave without killing the stranger?
I don't remember. I have to go back and rewatch
Right?
that part.
It's one of those things with the nomads. I mentioned this in our nomad in the episode where they show up and they slap the one steward and push her to the ground and then demand that they turn over the Harfoots. I'm like, well, why didn't they just wreck the place? The same thing is true here. The stranger rejects the Dark Wizard's offer. The Dark Wizard is obviously powerful. The stranger doesn't have his staff. He doesn't care about destroying this canyon and potentially killing the people who are living in it. So why doesn't he just actually kill them and actually kill the stranger while he's at it? It's like these things don't make sense. The characters who are supposed to be menacing aren't, partially because we barely spent any time with them and they haven't confronted our heroes before, but also because they don't do things that evil people do. Sauron destroyed the Westfold, right? He burned it. He released the Hillmen and his Uruk-hai, and they killed and they maimed and they ravaged the countryside. And then he got his comeuppance, right? So it's like, make your villains actually evil, or at least do evil things in order to pursue their ends. Anyway, mini rant.
The last thing with Rune that I actually liked was the last scene with Bombadil and Gandalf. Bombadil pouring the 2 cups of tea before Gandalf even enters the door. So that idea of, I don't know, omnipotence.
Tom knows.
Kind of. Yeah. That he was given the options and he knew Gandalf was going to choose the right thing and all of that. I like that. Plus that tea kettle, the hedgehog tea kettle, pretty dope.
Yeah. You got to find
I got to find one.
You got to find a potter to make one for you.
Next, let's go to Khazad-dûm.
Yes.
The first thing, the episode starts with a cold open of Khazad-dûm. We have King Durin has just attacked his own men. They are all bloodied and laying at the entrance to the mine. And he is ramming a mine into the wall. Prince Durin goes to confront him. And in the end, King Durin releases the Balrog and sacrifices himself. And none of it matters because we don't care. I will say, the acting in Khazad-dûm between King Durin and Prince Durin, I thought was pretty well done throughout the entire season. Again, the problem is just everything's so rushed that there's no time to actually build that character development. So when King Durin does charge at a Balrog and sacrifice himself, that you would hopefully care. And in just this instance, I did not care. What are your thoughts about Khazad-dûm?
Yeah, I think you used the phrase "it wasn't earned." I agree with that. Maybe I said that during our watch through.
I think you used that multiple times for
multiple things that also
multiple things
that
in
weren't
this show.
earned.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's I am going to put I'm going to guess that in the writer's room, one thing that they do is they come up with these images or these scenes that they want to get to. And I remember, and I think this is relatively common. It's like a type of storyboarding, right? But instead of having a story develop and then you refine it and you make all of the the rising action and the climax and the denouement all make sense, this method of coming up with a cool image and then working your way to it without refining and deepening it is cheap. And this is an example of that, where you have this slow motion, epic scene with King Durin jumping off a cliff with an axe as the cavern falls down and he's jumping at the Balrog. Where it's
Look
like,
good though.
it looked great. It looked awesome. And I don't, and just can we do a real quick aside? I know everybody loves Bear McCreary. I cannot think of one single example of the music of the Rings of Power. Like there, and I think we talked about this in the last season. It's like there are multiple pieces of music that I can hear and I am instantly transported to the Shire or to Pelennor or to Helm's Deep or some, the Grey Havens. It doesn't matter. There's no, there's nothing like deeply memorable about this scene. And I bring up the music because I'm sure the music in that moment was cool, but it didn't resonate because this was so unearned. But like the only people who know that the Balrog is a threat are the people who've seen The Lord of the Rings or who've read the book because they don't establish what this thing is. They don't show it doing anything that menacing. And then after the cavern collapses and King Durin seemingly sacrifices himself, there's no mention of the Balrog. And we have additional scenes with the survivors with now Durin the Fourth and Narvi, and they don't even talk about the Balrog. Listeners, I'm waiting for Sean to put his headphones back on as they fell off because he was blown away by my.
Why did you ask me a question?
Well, what did I ask you a question?
I don't know.
I have to listen to the recording. No, I was just saying that
I
they
thought you
don't.
were just continuing your rant,
I
so I
was
slowly put my
no.
headphones back on. Then you were talking
Well,
about my headphones.
I want you to react to my rant, which is they don't do anything to establish that the Balrog is that much of a threat. Because like,
No, like I said, here's me responding to your rant.
yeah.
Like I said in the pre-recording thing, they just continue life.
Yeah.
Well, you would think the revelation of this large fire demon in the depths of your mountain would prompt more of a response from the new King Durin the Fourth.
Yeah. Who saw
And
it?
who saw it.
Yeah.
And I mean, who else saw it? The one guard and Disa, maybe.
Yeah, like
Someone,
several other dwarves show up at the
yeah,
very end to
to
like
pull
pull
him
him out.
away.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they definitely have also seen it. It's not like it was just Prince Durin. So that just doesn't really jive with me. And then on top of like what should be, all right, how do we fix the issues of a Balrog in our basement? Basically, it turns into other dwarves are trying to like consolidate power and take over the throne and the death of King Durin the Third. So it just, I'm slightly interested in how the events of Khazad-dûm progress into season 3. I hope that they spend more time with it so I care more. But I don't know, like with the Hobbit storyline, I forgot to mention it when we were talking about it, but I honestly hope that that storyline is over. And they kind of set it up where they're going to leave and walk away and they're going to go find a new home. If I never hear from a Hobbit in the rest of Rings of Power, I will be so thrilled.
They have wasted so much screen time with those fucking Harfoots and the Stranger for absolutely nothing. And it's all screen time that could have really been used to flesh out these other better, more interesting storylines that are more
Yeah.
central to the conflict of the age.
The dwarves in particular. Like imagine all of the Harfoot time and Stewart time in this season if it was instead put into the relationship between Prince and King Durin,
Mm-hmm.
and like the events, the politics of Khazad-dûm. Because then the only thing that we've really heard about in terms of like the other dwarf kingdoms were all of the other kingdoms that sent emissaries to hear about the rings, and that's it. Like I wanted to know more about all of these other King in the Blue Mountain. Are the Iron Mountains established at this point? Is Erebor established at this point? So like there's all of these other facets of Khazad-dûm, like that storyline that I want to know.
Oh, and like at the very in the climax of this storyline, when King Durin is about to sacrifice himself, he takes the ring off, correct?
Mhm.
And like it is fully established that Durin the Third is suspicious of the rings and was strenuously arguing with his father to take it off, that it had a bad influence, and he's seen the effect that it has. But then it's kind of hinted that the other dwarvish kings or lords want their rings that were promised. But couldn't he just say, no, they're not for sale? Like take your money back and then just keep them for himself or destroy them or hide them or something like that? Like it doesn't make any sense in the established lore. I guess let me be frank. They're going to have to in future seasons establish how Durin changes his mind and distributes the dwarven rings, and maybe it'll be something with the Balrog and it'll be something with all this politics. But like again, we're only at this point because the writers wrote it this way, where you didn't have to make it so obvious that the rings had this negative influence. Because like canonically, the dwarves are actually really resistant to the negative influence of the ring, and it does make them more greedy, but it doesn't make them evil beyond however much you want to say greed is evil. It just heightens their greed, but it also leads to like them amassing all of this wealth that they then like use and display, and that gets into its own issues. So I just don't like the
Well,
shallowness
even
of the conflicts that they're setting up.
at this point too, like it just doesn't make any sense for Durin the Fourth, who now is in control of the Seven Rings. He just saw his father succumb to their power, almost release a Balrog, and then sacrifice himself. Why would he turn around and give these other rings to
Yeah,
the other kingdoms? So nonsense. Just
it is.
pure nonsense.
And I know that
Okay.
I know that they've established that he has a brother before. I think that came up in season 1 during a conversation with the king and the prince. But could we have met the brother up to this point? Like, it would have been nice to at least associate him. Like, maybe there would have been a different dynamic if it was like the younger brother and the king were in favor of the rings, and then Durin and Narvi and Disa were against the rings. Either that's a small, that's a small potatoes, but still, it's like they do all these things to advance the plot by referencing characters that we've never met, and they even talk about other claimants. So like there's going to be people beyond just his brother. So it like just piling too much onto their plate. When you mentioned the Balrog in the basement, like deal with that. Like, and that was the other thing. Like they chose to introduce the Balrog outside of the canonical timeline. Like the Balrog was like a mid to late third age thing. We are thousands of years premature in the release of the Balrog. They've barely mined any mithril. They were supposed to have mined a lot of mithril, so much to the point where like, they could make a little suit of armor or a chain shirt that eventually Frodo and before him Bilbo had. So like these are all issues of their own making. Anyway, let's move on to Pelargir.
Next up is Pelargir. My first note: fucking Kemen just appears out of nowhere.
Yep.
And we had the same thing with the stranger, how they don't show him travel at all. He just appears in a location. That one's a little bit more believable because you could assume that he maybe only had to walk a day or two to get to the Hobbit
And we knew
town
that
or
he was
whatever.
motivated to
Yeah, to go
get
there.
back with his friends and whatever else, even though we
But
never saw
again,
him make that decision.
with Numenor, we have individuals traveling over potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of nautical miles. going from a small island in the middle of the ocean to a small settlement in the Southlands. And it gets really frustrating when characters just disappear in one location and appear in another. And it's happened multiple times in this season with Arondir going from Mordor to Eregion, with the army of Sar or of Adar going from Mordor to Eregion.
Elrond crisscrossing
Yeah,
Eregion or
Elrond
in the Valyrian,
crisscrossing.
or excuse me, or
Even in the opening scene of this season, we have supposedly a horse chase
oh
between
yeah.
Galadriel and Elrond that goes from Eregion all the way to Lindon. So that really kind of put a bad taste in my mouth to begin with Kemen.
The thing that I didn't like is it's not been established that he was going to Pelargir or why he was there. There was no scene of Pharazôn saying, go to Pelargir and do XYZ. He kind of lays out these terms to the residents of Pelargir about like paying tribute in the form of timber, he even references like building an armada, which where's the armada coming from? Why does Pharazôn now want to build an armada?
Why does he need an armada?
Why does he need an armada? Don't they already have some ships? We've already seen their ships in season one. So it doesn't make any his motivation for being there doesn't make any sense. The timeline is an issue. And then it all just comes in this context of we still don't know, even having spent multiple time in multiple episodes over the course of this season in Pelargir, we still don't really know what its deal is. It seems to simultaneously be both a former Númenórean colony that is
I thought it was a current
so it's like
Númenórean colony. And
it's
I think
confusing.
the clarification they could have provided in the beginning of the season when they were talking about Pelargir, or the end of season one, whatever it was, if they would have said the ruins of Pelargir, we're going to go there, that would have made way more sense. They'd be like, okay, yes, this is a settlement that is no longer existing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they ever reference it as the ruins. They always say the settlement or
Yeah, well, and I wouldn't put it past the writers to not understand what language means or like what specific words mean. So if they say the settlement or the ruins or they don't say those things, I think they don't mind leaving things ambiguous even when it causes confusion among the viewer. But then they also have like this abandoned aqueduct, right? That all of a sudden, Isildur turns a knob and gets the water flowing again, which, yeah, right. But then you also could have had a line of dialogue when the Númenórean forces are now back and Kemen is here talking about knocking buildings over and building a watchtower and paying all this tribute. Perfect opportunity for somebody to say, like, Númenóreans haven't lived here in 500 years. Like, what right do you have to come and evict us from our homes? Like, we're the ones who like have been rebuilding and everything else. Like, you could have at least made reference to it, and it would have made sense in the context that we can understand. So there's that confusing aspect of it. Like, yeah, is this a current colony? Is it a former colony? Was it abandoned? Were there any Númenórean descendants still living there? Was it completely overtaken by exiles from the Southlands? And then even between in that aspect, you've got the supposed like the wild men who are this faction that were introduced at the beginning of this season, and then you've got seemingly the non-wild men. We don't get any clarification about what those two groups of humans either have in common or don't have in common. We get some reference that they were at least antagonistic of each other. Obviously, there's the ambush that of Isildur and Arondir intervenes in. So there doesn't seem to be any qualms that the wild men have with attacking non-wild men. But then there's a line of dialogue here from Theo where he explains that Hagen, who is the wild man husband of, or the betrothed of Estrid, is the leader of half the colony, implying that wild men make up half the population of the people living there. Which, again, how did we get to that point? What are the implications? And then finally, is like Arondir named Theo the Lord of Pelargir. It was just the two of them in the woods. We never see anybody recognize Theo's leadership. or seemingly have an issue with a teenage boy being the leader of a colony or a settlement full of adults. And you think that would have been a point of conversation, to say the least. So there's just so many confusing aspects of this already. And then it's made more confusing by the Numenorians showing up out of nowhere to extract tribute.
And now to Numenor. My only issue
The
with
source of all
Numenor,
the confusion.
yeah, my only issue with Numenor, and it's relatively minor, but it's in our season 2 recap. I really want to go through. I have to. It would cause me to have to rewatch the entire season, which is kind of rough. But I want to have a list of every time this show just stole scenes from Peter Jackson's trilogy, whether
I,
it's
I,
like
I bet there's a
imagery or
dialogue.
dialogue, whatever it is. But in this scene in particular, Muriel is giving Elendil a sword, and it turns out to be Narsil. And when he pulls it from the sheath, it's like a shot for shot of Aragorn pulling Anduril before going to Minas Tirith. But it's like, enough.
Yeah.
Do your own shit. I'm tired of seeing it. It's okay every once in a while if you do something that's like an homage to a property that everybody loves, but we're far past homage territory with this show, and I'm tired of do something new. Give me something that I haven't seen before, because they're really beating this horse to a dead pulp.
Yeah. That was a another example of this that's been a bugbear over the course of the entire season. I think another issue is that they're also stealing from themselves in this episode, where they have like another one of these kind of roundup confrontations between the faithful and the Kingsmen. So you mentioned this, the violent roundup of the faithful is very similar to the violent confrontation between the faithful and Kemen. And again, it's one of those scenes of, Elendil kind of being involved in this, and he's arrested the first time, and then they free him, and then immediately they go out and start persecuting him again. This time he escapes. So just kind of repetitive, right? Like what was the point of the sea trial, right? It didn't actually do anything, seemingly. There's no.
Yeah, there was no point, because you have a scene in a previous episode of them attacking the faithful. Then you have this trial or whatever. And then you have another scene of them being like, yeah, we're going to attack them anyway. So it's so much wasted time in
Mhm.
Numenor.
I mean, and the other thing, and it's seemingly this whole like this return to persecuting the faithful and arresting Muriel is motivated by Pharazôn discovering that Sauron, or excuse me, that Halbrand is Sauron using the Palantir. And I don't recall how that was communicated. Do you recall how it was communicated? That Pharazôn learned Halbrand was Sauron?
I think you can just assume that he saw it in visions.
Right.
So I don't get your question then.
But like, why does Pharazôn? I just like, what is the mechanism by which Pharazôn learns that Halbrand was Sauron?
Palantir
Right, and
in visions.
how is the Palantir
I
in
think the
possession
question
of
you
that
want to,
information?
yeah, I think the question you want to ask is, does this show understand what Palantiri are? And
Well,
the answer to that question is no,
the
because
answer to that question is no. And then
Palantir talk to other Palantir. That's
yeah, and canonically, all of the Palantir are on Numenor, and actually, all of the Palantir are on Numenor and in possession of the Lords of the West, which is technically Elendil and his family. Which I also think I think Narsil is also in their possession technically. Like it wasn't the sword of the king or anything like that. It was the sword of the the Lord of the West. But either I'm not 100% sure on that. But then the other thing is, even in the reality of the show, where the Palantir is seemingly a seeing stone for things that happened in the past and in the future, or like this tool to reveal truth, what is the mechanism? Is it because there's only like kind of one type of magic that's been established, which is the magic of the Valar? Maybe the dark magic of the the Dark Wizard and his disciples as well, but it's unclear that that is wholly unconnected from at least the Maya. Are we supposed to believe that the Valar showed Farazan through the Palantir that Halbrand was Sauron?
I
Because
think
there's a
I think you're getting way too in the weeds with
well, I'm
this.
just I mean like, but yeah, but it's like oh, it just doesn't make any sense, and that's the
I
thing.
don't. I don't think it's going to.
All right,
So
well, let me say this. I'm yeah.
I think we can round that up with they don't understand how Palantiri work.
They don't
And
understand how Palantir work. And I mean it's just this we'll talk about in the recap, but I think the whole like in this episode establishing one like establishing that there's other members of Elendil's family, specifically his son Anarion, and that he could go back to the west of Numenor with this like power base of faithful. They waited way too long to introduce that because that is actually one of the more that could be the interesting thing about the Numenor plot. And again, it's one of those things that they didn't do that resulted in this plotline being a little shallow. For as interesting as it was at points, this episode suffers from trying to establish things that could have been established much earlier on. All right, and with that,
if only we had more time to
with
spend on the show, because then everything else would be able to be flushed out and
I
much
mean,
more
they're
coherent.
spending millions of dollars to producing it. Why don't they just give
Isn't
us?
it like $58 million an episode?
Is it?
I think it's something insane like that.
That is
You give
absolutely
them
insane. Where does that money go?
let me find it. You start breaking down Eregion and I'll look for the actual number.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about the big positive thing here is the scenes with Sauron and Celebrimbor. You've got some really great lines from Celebrimbor, basically establishing that Sauron is a slave to power, and he even hints at his downfall through the ring, through the One Ring, even though he doesn't mention it as explicitly, but that's definitely what he's hinting at. This show's also a very complicated Sauron. He cries, he's getting emotional. Charlie Vickers' acting continues to be one of the strongest aspects of the show, as this scene was kind of the culmination of that. Oh,
Sorry,
we
I'm
have
going to
an
jump in
answer.
quick. No, I don't have an answer yet, but I just
Oh,
want to jump in and make sure I said something while you're talking about Charlie Vickers' portrayal. I really, really like what I've seen out of Sauron in the last couple episodes. And with the death of Celebrimbor in particular, the most powerful thing for me was the tears and the crying when Celebrimbor basically says that you're not the Lord of the Rings, you're a slave to them, and their power will be your downfall. And then when Celebrimbor dies, you see Sauron actually shed tears. And I thought the portrayal and the decisions they made in regards to Sauron have been great because it shows the dual nature of him as an entity. So he hasn't been evil his entire time being. And they do a really good job in this season of dropping little visuals of the Sauron of Valinor coming through when he was still a good guy. And I really, really like those scenes. And this scene in particular between Celebrimbor and Sauron, I think, is chef's kiss.
yeah. That was a strong part of it. All right, there's some other smaller scenes or things that we just wanted to point out. So we like the fact that the orcs are established as book burning fascists. They're making a bonfire of all of the scrolls of the records of Celebrimbor's works. Gil-galad and Elrond protest this, uh, but then are rescued. Oh, we have an answer.
I do have an answer. The first season of the show had a budget of $465 million or 58 to $59 million per episode to produce.
Awesome.
And I look at that and I just go, I mean, you asked the question, what is that money being spent on?
Yeah.
And then you look at, and I think season one, when we found out how much the show cost, and then I think we were so bitterly disappointed in the armor of Numenor
Oh,
because it
yeah.
just looked cheap. It looked like
Yeah.
Spirit Halloween. And no offense, Spirit Halloween, not a sponsor. But I just feel like for how much money is being spent on this show, it has to be better than what we're getting, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny where things fall flat. You have so much money, yet the armor looks cheap and like obviously cheap. You have so much money, yet you can't produce one more episode, two more episodes a season. Like just shave off $5 million from each episode and give us another episode, right? Like you
Or
have,
shave off $5 million per episode and just hire phenomenal writers.
or yeah, I mean, get rid of the Harfoot stuff to give us more minutes in each episode to dedicate to these better storylines. It's just, yeah, it's insane. And whatever. I mean, Amazon has the money. Bezos wanted his Game of Thrones, and he's getting it. All right, so some other highlights. We talked about the orcs and the book burning. I think both of us really liked that Morgoth's crown acted like a Morgul blade when Galadriel was stabbed with it. She was, fading and turning into a wraith-like being, and they needed the power of the rings to save her, and they did.
You want to talk about the power of the ring curing Adar?
Yeah, that was cool. So this was actually this was a moment that I appreciated when I watched it. And then you think from our pre-recording conversation, you took the fact that his deformities were cured by the ring, and then his dialogue and his actions to explain kind of a shift in his character brought about by the ring. Can you and I in my one watch, this escaped me. And I'll say that I think I'm convinced of your perspective. And I wonder if it was intentional on the part of the writers. But why don't you go ahead and talk about the change in Adar, what that led him to do, and then the consequences of that, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So before you were confused about why, after that battle outside the walls, why didn't Adar just like continue with his army and attack the city and be like the vanguard into Eregion? But I think having the power of the ring, one of the three elven rings, when he puts it on, it visibly cures him. And he has a line where he says it can undo basically like an age of torture. And he also has a conversation right after that where he and Galadriel are talking. He takes the ring off and gives it to her, but then he says, we should work together, basically form an alliance, defeat Sauron, and then my children and I will leave and live in Mordor in peace, and we'll leave you alone. And I think one of the more powerful moments too with that is she goes, I've killed countless of your children. And then he says, I think he forgives her in that moment too. And I think putting the ring on allowed him both clarity of like physical body and clarity of mind. And I think in that moment, he sees, kind of goes back to that elf that he used to be before he was tortured and became an Uruk. And he even says that too. He says, help me reclaim my name. This is the one I've earned. Adar is the one I've earned, but help me reclaim my former name.
Do we get what
So
his former name was, by the
no,
way?
never
No,
says
okay.
it. No. And I think it's more of an aspect of the power of the ring itself. Unfortunately, they end up killing him right after this scene happens, which I think it's well done in terms of you build up a character and have hope in a character, and then the show immediately destroys that. So I think it was well done, even though I hated it, because Adar is or was quite possibly the character that I was the most interested in. And now that he's gone, I don't know who I really care about anymore. Maybe Elrond,
Yeah, I mean,
maybe.
maybe Elrond is probably the last remaining admirable, interesting character.
Yeah,
Maybe Durin.
maybe Durin.
Yeah,
Círdan, if they give me a lot more Círdan, I'd be cool with that.
I think Círdan existed only to facilitate the wearing of the three rings, and
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get some more of him. Yeah, I mean, he would have been great to have around from the very beginning because he was a lot more important than season one and even the couple episodes of season two where he appears made him out to be. Okay, so
I,
here,
sorry, I will say Sauron as well. I think Charlie Vickers' portrayal of Sauron, I'm very interested to see
yes, okay,
in
yeah,
what
no,
happens with him.
that
But I
is
mean, they killed Celebrimbor and they killed Adar. They were two characters this season that I like.
they're killing all the good ones.
Yeah, all the characters I give any shits about, they're killing, and I'm becoming to be very nervous.
Well, okay, so here's my response, and this came to me as you were discussing your thoughts on it. Those are the exact Adar is making the same offer that he made earlier before he wore the ring. When Galadriel was his prisoner and they were discussing the situation, he says, with your ring and the crown of Morgoth, we can kill Sauron. So he's offering to work together. And at no point, I don't believe at any point up to this episode does he say, we're going to conquer this city and we're going to occupy this land. I think he only ever talks about how we were here to kill Sauron. And so he still wants the same outcome. He's still offering kind of the same terms. He just seems to have been softened somewhat and maybe even, I don't know, weakened or caused him to drop his guard or something. I don't know. He
I don't think
seems
drop his guard. I think he just becomes more elf-like instead of orc-like.
okay. Okay. Yeah. I see that. I will say that I would have benefited from, and this goes, some of this is like is a continuity thing where we already talked to at the top of this recording about how the stranger just shows up in the canyon when the last time we saw him he was looking over a forest of trees with Tom Bombadil, and it made sense that he would eventually go to the canyon, but how did he get there from where we last saw him? The same is true in my thinking with Adar. The last time we saw Adar, he was in front of the walls of the city, having just led the attack that defeated the last elves. He took the ring from Elrond. You think, from a continuity standpoint, the next time we see him would be leading his forces into the city, leading the search for Sauron. Now that he has the ring, he already had the crown, he's going to find Sauron and kill him. If they had established that he takes the ring and he puts it on and there's immediately this interesting effect on him, that would give me a reason to be more credulous that that the possession or the wearing of the ring caused him to not pursue his ultimate objective, which seemingly again didn't change from when before he had the ring to after he had the ring, and that objective being to find and kill, destroy Sauron. And I still think that he knows Sauron is dangerous and powerful and a deceiver. Would he have let his orcs go into the city to find Sauron without like closely monitoring them? Shouldn't he have been on the lookout for Sauron trying to uh, turn them against Adar in the way seemingly that he ultimately did? So those are there's like just a few little inconsistencies there with Adar. I buy the fact that the ring changed him. I would have wanted that change to have made sense in the continuity of the action that we've already seen.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with you on the orcs turning because they purposefully painted the orcs that find him as orcs that were beginning to question Adar's leadership over the entire season. And I think you could make the argument that even if Adar was in Eregion leading the charge, that this particular band of orcs is also seeking out Sauron for a different purpose. So I don't know if Adar would be able to control these individuals. You know what I mean? So like if they're trying to find Sauron to take over leadership of the orcs, I don't know if they're waiting for Adar to join them in the search for Sauron. So I mean,
Do you think that those orcs, the orcs that found Sauron, were specifically seeking him out so that they could go over to him?
yeah. they made it very evident over the siege when Adar was like sending in orcs on the assault. They kept going to that one. I can't remember his
I
name.
think it's Glug or Golg or
Glug.
something.
I think it's Glug. They kept going to like showing Glug's face and like the disappointment, the anger,
Yeah. No, I buy.
disagreeing with decisions. So I think, and again, this is us like coming up with our own rationale for why things happened and the writers don't provide it. But I think it's safe to say that these particular orcs could have gone into Eregion and just sought Sauron out on their own, looking for an alternative leader. I don't know if it was Sauron plotting or anything like that. I think it was this renegade band of orcs was ready for a change and we're trying to find a new leader. So to me, that's how this
Yeah.
all comes about. But
I mean, I think your explanation makes a lot of sense. I think you're smarter than the writers, and so you're filling in gaps with things that make sense logically. I don't know if that's there.
well, it's things that make sense, but then like we've talked about previous episodes of this season and this show in general, it gets really tiring as a viewer when you constantly have to fill in gaps to make things make sense. And the writing should just be clear and coherent to where you're not expecting your
Yeah.
viewer to do these things. And it just gets really cumbersome.
Well, and this is also hampered by we didn't even we really haven't talked about the problem with the orcs that this season's treatment, and even someone in season one, but especially this season's treatment has brought up, where there is this conflict within Tolkien's writings about the nature of the orcs, and are they purely evil, or are they capable of good? Do they have souls? Do they how do they reproduce? Right? In the Lord of the Rings movies, we see them pulling Uruks or Uruk-hai out of the mud, implying that they are somehow like grown or otherwise gestated in mud or dirt or the earth. In this season, we've established that they have families and children, and I don't know if it's in an official book or if it's in some of his letters, but Tolkien described them as reproducing in the manner of the children of Iluvatar, meaning sexual reproduction. But then we have Sauron talking about orcs in like a blood rage or like a blood frenzy and describing them like animals, and they act very barbaric in a lot of ways and cruel. And there's that scene with the orcs, um, obviously the book burning. You've got the scene in the prior episode of the one orcs cutting the throat of Elrond's horse and like licking the blood off of it and just doing these very cruel things. And so it's like, how is Adar leading them and controlling them exactly? And how is Sauron leading and controlling them exactly? Like Sauron with the ring can dominate their wills and force them to serve him. But Sauron doesn't have the ring.
No, but they make it very clear that his tactic is through fear. Because in the end of this episode, when the orcs approach him, one gives him information he doesn't want to hear and stabs him in the throat. And then the
Yeah,
other orc kind of scampers away and is like submissive. So I think it's definitely until the one ring is created, it's going to be through fear.
yeah. Which to be fair, like I don't hate the fact that Glug or Gol died or was killed, but it was kind of shitty because he was just delivering bad news. Like, Sauron is not supposed to be
No,
Stalin.
that guy killed Adar. I wanted him dead.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, we can want him dead, but I don't think Sauron wanted him dead right up until the point of killing him. I was like, why did you do that, Sauron? Sauron has demonstrated himself.
Consolidate power. You make an example of one to all the other ones who are watching
Yeah, but
you that
but you just made an example of the one who has done the most to support you up to this point. Like what he should have done is like, you know, again, the thing that seemingly the proximate cause of Glug's death was telling Sauron some bad stuff happened. Like you think this master manipulator would not be so impulsive and
I don't
murderous.
know. I think it does a whole lot, that scene. It tells the audience that Sauron really doesn't care about orcs
That came through. Yeah.
It shows you that he rules with an iron fist. Yes.
Yeah, I would have liked it better if it had been like, hey, well, to be frank, I don't remember all of the dialogue. I do not recall there being a disagreement about a course of action, right? Because if it was Glug said, you know, Lord, we need to retreat. The dwarves are too well armed and there are too many of them. And Sauron's like, no, we're gonna fight our way through. And Glug's like, you're just as bad as Adar. And then he gets stabbed. That's one thing, but I don't recall that being the case.
No, because they end up retreating.
I know, which is things like
I know
so
there isn't a. I
right.
think
So like
he's mad at the situation and he takes it out on an orc.
yeah, but so to me, that's not ruling with an iron fist. Ruling with an iron fist is like tolerating no dissent and being very brutal and putting down anybody who.
Okay, now you're nitpicking my iron fist.
Well, no, but that's what I'm saying.
It's
but
it's
like,
the use of fear that he's going to control and wield power through fear. And this orc individual gave him news he didn't want to hear. He was unhappy with the having to retreat, and he killed the orc that told him that. And all of the other orcs that were watching this situation now have a healthy fear of Sauron and telling him things he doesn't want to hear. So I think that's all they were trying to portray. You don't have to do your pedantic shit with me, man. Keep
I
it
just
to the show.
yeah. Well, no, I was think, but I mean, a part of it is because I agree with you. Sauron is a tyrant, but he's not arbitrary. Like he, you know, it, yeah. I think he
I
killed the
don't know.
wrong
I think he
person.
is when it comes to orcs. I think
Okay.
even in Tolkien's work, it's not like he's ever treated orcs well.
No,
They're
but which
tortured beings.
which
They're
again, so then why did the orcs decide to go over to him?
because Adar was showing the same things that he was trying to lead them away from. And this group of orcs, I mean, have we established that orcs are immortal beings?
No.
So the orcs that killed the first Sauron thousands of years ago, or whatever it was, would feasibly not exist at this time.
Yeah.
So these orcs have no idea what the treatment of Sauron was like. So when Adar is doing things that are putting orcs in harm's way, needlessly risking the lives of their brethren, they're going to turn and look for different leadership. And they know Sauron was a former leader. They probably don't know the ins and outs of what his leadership entails. So they're just looking for a change. Now, did they pick the wrong horse? Yes. Was Adar the one who was going to do the best for them? Yeah. But that's life, man. Sometimes you vote for the wrong person and you got to live with it. Last
Yeah,
thing we see, because
or
we've been
die with
going
it.
on for a long episode, Imladris is founded at the very end, and that is the last thing we see.
Yeah.
And basically, the elves are preparing for a fight.
Yeah, which by the end of this episode, I was so kind of tired of it. I don't know. It was one of those things where it was just a lot of visuals that were supposed to be striking and impressive, but just fell flat with me because it just looks so contrived. Um,
I'm ready for my 2-year break from Rings of Power before I have to watch it again.
yeah. Well, we are gonna do a season wrap up, season look back, which may or may not just turn into rewriting certain parts of this. We'll see. I've got some additional ideas that are percolating, and then what's next, Sean? We're going to cover Vox Machina season 3, Legend of Vox Machina season 3, which has been out. I think the
For a little bit.
first 6 episodes have already been released. Is that correct?
Yeah, because the problem is every Thursday they release 3 episodes.
Yeah. So we're
which is what we've
behind.
dealt with in the past with seasons 1 and 2. So we'll probably do our 3 episode per Elves, Rings, Nerdy Things episode recap.
Yeah.
But that has been episode 98, the season finale of season 2 of Rings of Power. Next week, we will most likely have our season 2 recap episode where we will bitch and moan and complain about the writers and talk about the positives, because this season did have way more positives for me than season 1 had. So I'm excited to talk about good things as well as the bad things. You can follow us on Facebook, Elves Brings Nerdy Things. You can send us email, elvesbringsnerdythings@gmail.com. We have a Facebook group, Elves Brings Nerdy Things Podcast. You can listen to us on pretty much every podcasting app there is. I don't know, Spotify tends to be our most popular. Anything else, Sam?
Nope, that's it. Looking forward to
All
recapping the season.
Bye, everybody.